those who don't know me, I'm Aaron. Well, this will be going up on my Facebook page, so you'll be able to tie my face to it anyhow. I don't normally do things of this nature, like create videos, post them on the internet and whatnot, and with my findings and thoughts. But there's been things going on recently that I feel as though I need to address. I've been compelled, if you will, to address certain topics. And by certain topics, I mean what's currently going on throughout America right now. Well, it's a constant thing for a good majority of the people. As you can see visually, I am African American. I'm considered African American, black, if you will. I'm also a male. I live in urban area, city. Live in the city of Pittsburgh. I used to live in the city of Philadelphia. I also lived in the city of Detroit. I lived in those three cities for the majority of my life. Had a pretty much normal upbringing for a black person in the United States. Guess I'll get to the topic. I'm going to be talking about oppression of black people, pretty much, by means of racial discrimination. So there's a couple of things that we need to get squared away before I start, talking arguments. First thing is the definition of oppression. Oppression is suffering of one particular group caused by another group, and it could be in a discriminatory fashion, like because of the way they look or the way they believe, what have you. The group has to be singled out in order to be oppressed, discriminated against. And I've heard a lot of different arguments about this topic, if you will, but they don't really stay within the confines of the definition. They don't have any solid validity because of that. I've heard all sorts of things like, how could black people be oppressed if there's so many successful black people? And first off, success is measured by an individual. Like there's no definitive meaning of success. Success is pretty much accomplishing things that you want to accomplish. Like that can be very simplistic, that could be extremely complicated, but it varies from person to person. It's subjective. So there's no definitive term for success. You can be successful in some endeavors and unsuccessful in others. So, and success has nothing to do with the definition of oppression. Like I said, oppression is one group putting another group in situations where they can be or experience suffering, where they would normally experience suffering. Now, suffering is a very integral part of oppression, but oppression isn't necessarily dependent upon suffering and how it's perceived. Like suffering always has to be perceived by something, either some outside observable entity, or the subject themselves has to perceive themselves as suffering in order for suffering to actually exist. That being said, suffering is pretty much an assessment of a being's or object's situation as compared to what it could be or what somebody thinks it should be. So in a sense, it's somewhat subjective. But oppression is one group trying to, or succeeding in, putting a different group in situations where they would normally be perceived as suffering. Like there's intent behind their actions, and there's methodology, and there's some type of evidence. It is evidence seen in their actions or words or culture that shows that they're trying to induce suffering. That is what we can argue. We can't argue whether a group of people are suffering or not. That's not how it works. We can argue if one group is deliberately trying to put another group into situations or circumstances where that group would perceive themselves as suffering, or where any group would perceive that particular group as suffering. That's what we can try to put evidence towards, what we can prove as definitive or not. That's the factual side. It has no bias, opinions, nobody coming up to theories arbitrarily. It's just either is or it is not. Another argument that I hear is that there's no laws or legislations in America today that hinder or bind black people, so therefore they're not being oppressed. But that is also a moot point, because there doesn't need to be any interaction from a governing body or a body that is considered an authority in society as a whole in order for oppression to exist. It just needs to be one group putting another group in unfavorable situations. So the government doesn't have to be involved. When the government is involved in the oppression of people, it is just blatantly obvious. It's just all the more meaningful that the oppression has to be addressed. But there doesn't need to be any hard evidence of authoritative body being involved in order for oppression to exist. It does make oppression worse, though. And just because there's no hard evidence of an authoritative body being involved doesn't mean that the authoritative body isn't involved through means of neglect or, just tolerance of certain behaviors of one group over another. Another thing that I hear is that it's, completely obvious that, black people have been oppressed in America's past, but, because there's no arguing slavery. Slavery happened. And after slavery, things didn't just all of a sudden become great. There was segregation and Jim Crow and all of the overt oppression that was plagued upon black people, that many of the grandparents and parents of people my age had to go through. So there are arguments that say that through those actions or inactions that we still have some repercussions that we go through today. But in my opinion, that's a very easy argument to prove, and I'm going to go even beyond that. So I won't be using that argument. But the fact that things are better, which is a subjective term, it's not definitively better, or nobody can prove what's better or worse, but because people perceive things as being better, they assume, therefore, there is no more oppression. But again, that has nothing to do with the definition of oppression. It can't be measured in degrees. It's either static. It's there or it's not there. And wouldn't you say that any amount of oppression is too much? Like, you wouldn't say, oh, they didn't kill that many people. They only killed 10. Like, no, it's still people dying. It doesn't matter to what degree of severity you believe that it is. There's no hash mark that you have to pass in order to graduate to oppression. Oppression is just there, or it isn't. It can be proven or it cannot be proven. That being said, the burden of proof falls onto the accuser. That means that black people have to show that there's some type of bias, culturally, systematically, what have you, that puts them in particular situations that would be normally considered unfavorable, that would be normally considered to be associated with suffering, like being wrongly accused of things, being killed unjustly, being viewed unjustly, having people defamate our characters on a daily basis for things that have little or nothing to do with us personally. Things of that nature, but have to be proven in a sense for black people in order to help people understand that oppression does in fact actually exist, and it is in fact taking place in America currently. So that seems like a lot that has to be done, but when things are happening, there's evidence of it. And where there's evidence, people can find it and bring it to the forefront. That's the point of arguments. So with our definition defined and what we need to look for articulated, I guess we can start to get into arguments. But another phrase that we hear all too often when black people bring up their grievances about how they're treated here in America, as opposed to how America should be treating us, or how people in America should be treating us. I'll say we always come across this term, black on black crime, or black on black violence, black on black something negative. But before I go a little further, I would like to explain something. A meme. Most people associate memes with just fun little pictures and caricatures that you see on YouTube that make people laugh and it's funny or whatever. But memes are much more diverse than that. And they have an actual social impact. That's the point of a meme. It has impact on lots of people in a given demographic, and they can even be national. Like, for instance, Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam is a meme. One that is more current, I should say, would be Obamacare. Obamacare was a meme. It was devised. It was probably not first stated by somebody in politics, but people in politics used it in order to demean the Government Affordable Health Care Act. They wanted to associate it more with President Obama, to get people who didn't support President Obama but who could benefit from the act in order to oppose it. They wanted to swing public opinion on the topic, and in some cases it worked. Another meme that's more recent, fake news. I know a lot of you heard that term before. You probably even felt some type of reaction, some type of response when you heard me say it. Like, it immediately brought up some type of instance that you could tie to it. That's what a meme does. And it automatically has a narrative implanted within the phrase or within the imagery in order to keep you in a certain thought pattern, so it can pretty much sway your opinion on certain topics. But what I'm getting at is that all this term, this phrase, black on black crime, that's all it is. It's a meme. Who devised the meme? People who wanted to see black people in situations where people would be afraid of them, where they could demean our character, where they could call us hyperviolent and say that we are criminal orient. But really, we're just the same as any other people. And that's the exact same reason why when these heinous mass shootings happen and these school shootings happen, you don't hear mass media spouting about phrases of white on white crime. It is simply not a thing. It's not a term. Those particular instances are referred to simply as tragedies. You know, when a criminal acts outside of society and does heinous things, that's all it is. When the assailant is of a certain persuasion. But if their skin is dark, like mine, their actions are immediately attributed to every single person of that demographic. And we come up to this term, black on black crime, when really those assailants are acting out of their own personal feelings, their own personal circumstances. It is just them being their criminal element. Criminals are outside of society. So why do black people get associated with people who clearly show through their actions that they are not a part of the community? They are destructive to the community. But y'all tell us, no, that is your community. That it doesn't make any sense. So that is a clear discrepancy, a fallacy of logic, that when committing similar acts, black people are given a completely different narrative than any other race in America, except for probably Hispanic people and Latinos. Are probably the only people that get a similar rap to us. But we have this term, this meme, black on black crime. So a narrative can be spun to make us always dangerous, always up to no good, always destructive. And it is embodied in our very existence. Whose story is that? But you could say, maybe it's because of the extreme behaviors and how it happens so often. You see it all over the news. Like, you can't ignore that. So what you're telling me is that another party is giving you this information. What makes certain stories, certain instances newsworthy and other stories not? They obviously can't report on every single instance that happens throughout humanity. They don't report on every single murder, every single violent crime that happens. They select specifically which crimes they want to show, which crimes they want to showcase, at what time of day they want to air these crimes and let the public know. These are choices that are made intentionally. It's intent to put things into a specific narrative. So you can say, look at all the evidence. But we know that black people weren't the only people who got involved in organized crime. You could even say that black people had the most organized crime groups. Like the most famous black groups that did crimes with Bloods and the Crips. They mostly shot up other gang members and shot up neighborhoods everywhere. And just did things in a destructive manner all the time. Like, but there's other examples of organized crime. You know, you have Italian groups. You ever hear of the mafia? There's also been Irish mafias. There's been all sorts of groups that are specific to different demographics that involve themselves in organized crime because of certain situations that they found themselves in. But still, we don't say, oh, look at all this Italian on Italian crime, or all of this Turkish on Turkish crime. It's known throughout the world that most violent crimes, about 85% of them, they're intraracial. It means you're committing these violent acts against the people of your demographic. Why? Convenience. You're not going to spend resources to go to someone else's territory to commit a violent act or criminal act and then come back to your place. That's inconvenient, and you're most likely to get caught. Like, you don't know what's going on in that area. You don't know the people in that area. You don't know how they move about and go throughout their day-to-day lives. It's too much risk. The point in committing a crime, I think everybody can agree on this, is to some extent that you think you're going to get away with it. What would be the point in going so far and completely maximizing your risk in order to try to do a crime that you can do 10 times with the same resources by just staying in your specific area and most likely get away with it? Most of the time you find a criminal, they're not a first-time offender. They've committed plenty of crimes by then. That's how they got caught. So the idea that black people are just these hyper-violent people who just commit crimes all day is just completely ludicrous. It's known throughout societal studies that poverty is a big driver for crimes. You put people in close-knit communities, like I mean by close-knit, like people literally being pushed together, and you have high population counts, and you put them in situations where they're always desperate, you're going to have a lot of crime. It's just common sense. And as I said before, criminals are not a part of a community. They literally tear the community down. So you can't say, look at all this black on black crime within the black community. What that data shows is that black people seem to be in situations where they're infested with criminal activity. And if that is somehow to a higher degree for black people, there is a way to approach it that is completely different than what's been being accepted so far. And then people could say, well, Aaron, maybe that label of black on black crime just comes from America being hyper judgmental. Maybe it's not necessarily a racial issue. Maybe we just see certain things and we just misconstrue them slightly. Maybe that's the case. Like, look at other labels that we give to other races. Like, look at the label that we give to white people. We give them a very terrible label sometimes when they commit or address certain topics in a demeaning manner. We call them white supremacists. Wouldn't, by your argument, white supremacists just be a meme that was built to destroy white people because they get emotional about certain topics? And I would say that would be a good argument if it was a good argument. But the thing about it is, the moniker of supremacy was not given exclusively to white people. It was also given to the Japanese. And even in here in America, it's been given to a completely different group. Enter the Black Panthers. You could say, oh, there's been studies on the Black Panthers that shows that they weren't about supremacy and what have you, and they did things to help their community and whatnot. None of that matters, because how they were labeled was a black supremacist group. They were labeled as a black supremacist group. They were even shut down by the FBI. Claims that it had nothing to do with their ideologies. But we all know that there is a white supremacist group who the Black Panthers have been compared to on numerous occasions that is still operating today. So that argument does not stand. Black people are still given an unfair narrative by the community at large. So what I'm saying is, black people have been invented to be hyper-violent, dangerous people. And you could also say, but look at your culture. Y'all celebrate violence and disrespect to authority throughout your entire culture. And I could say, let's be honest. You're specifically talking about rap. Talking about rap. That's a subgenre of a subgenre. Every black person doesn't even like rap. I grew up most of my adolescence despising rap. You can ask anybody who went to middle school with me if you find them. Other than that, let me take it a step farther and say, let's say you're somewhat right, but let's look at another aspect of our culture. You look at the NBA, tons of black men who are professional basketball players. Look at the NFL, tons of black men who are professional football players. And you can go to almost any sport and see the same thing. And we know that it takes tons of dedication to be a professional athlete. You have to start off as a child and play the sport all the way to your adulthood. And even those who do that are not guaranteed a spot professionally. Black people, black men, only make up about 6% of the country. How much of a percentage of professional athletes in this country do we make up? So wouldn't you say athleticism is more of our culture than violent acts? I would say so. But let's get back on the music. Patti LaBelle. How many songs about violence did she make? What about Anita Baker? Let's get to rappers. What about Common? How many violent songs did he make? What about Lauryn Hill? She's a rapper. What about Queen Latifah? She's a rapper. There's tons of rappers who don't celebrate that. Well, my time is limited. This was a raw, uncut video. If you see any editing whatsoever, please do not take that as my contextual meaning. You can comment, you can feel however you want about this, but it is obvious, it's evident. Black people in America are oppressed. Thank you for your time.